Welcome back, or if it's your first time, I'm glad to have you here. I'm Matt Fendora, and you're tuned in to the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, where we journey together toward becoming the best version of ourselves. Using mind, body, heart, and spirit as the anchors of our podcast, join me as we set sail into the depths of self-discovery, unraveling the interconnected layers that shape our growth. If you resonate with today's conversation, consider subscribing to the podcast. Your support means the world to us and ensures you never miss an empowering episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, your go-to destination for personal growth and empowerment. Whether you're a loyal listener or a newcomer, I'm grateful for your presence. Today, we have the pleasure of chatting with Chrissy Trotter. Chrissy is an Air Force brat who grew up without one place to call home. In high school, she visited France, her first international trip, and she was hooked. After college, she backpacked across Western Europe, seeing 9 countries in 3 months. She worked as a customer experience and operations consultant to large commercial airlines for nearly 15 years and was able to visit many cities and countries across the world. She took a break when her kids were born and now has reemerged with a second career as both a travel writer and a travel advisor. She is passionate about being thoughtful about travel throughout your life to check things off your bucket list. Chrissy's proudest accomplishments include her 2 kids, her daughter who's 11 and her son who's 8, traveling around the world for 1 year to 23 countries with her husband, surviving breast cancer, and starting a new career in business as a travel advisor and travel writer. What makes Chrissy's heart sing? You may not believe it, but traveling and spending time with her husband and kids. Without further ado, here's Chrissy. How are you doing today, Chrissy?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm really excited to have this conversation because traveling is so important and I feel like underrated. But the first thing I want to do is I just want to acknowledge the journey that you went through surviving breast cancer. And that is an amazing accomplishment. And I'm so happy that you came out on the other side because not everybody gets to do that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, it was not a fun year last year, but but I'm excited to be doing the things that I'm more interested in doing now.
Absolutely. So my first question for you is, I'd love to start off by talking about the first trip that you took to France and how you got hooked on traveling from that trip.
Yeah. So it was interesting because it actually kind of started in 3rd grade, and my parents, my dad was Air Force, but like all the places that we lived were all within the US. But somewhere along the way, I just decided that I was all about France. And so in 3rd grade, I started taking lessons. And I remember going to elementary school in the morning early, like 7:30 in the morning, to learn a little bit about French. And then I continued like doing lessons all throughout. I think I got the first opportunity to take it regularly in classes in middle school. And I did it in high school. And then I had a French teacher, Madame Meyer, who I absolutely adored. And she invited us to go to Paris and do some other cities. It was right after we got out of school that year. And we had some pen pals down in the South in Aix-en-Provence. And so I got to meet my pen pal, stay with her family. And so that was really where I first started. And I was completely hooked. Just, a new place and just, everybody speaking a different language, and the art and the music and the food. And it was just so different from the United States. And I just really loved everything about it.
What was it that sparked your interest in 3rd grade about France specifically? Like, of all the countries, why France?
I have no idea. It's like, I also was a Miami Dolphins fan, which was very random. I have no idea. It was just one of those things that got me hooked. And it's kind of interesting because there wasn't, my family didn't really have any, didn't seem to have any interest anyway about traveling internationally. So I think it was just something, I was the second kid, and just to be kind of different, that was something that I decided to make my passion. So
That's interesting because I'm also the second child, and I understand where you're coming from. And I ended up joining the military because I was the second child. I had to do something different than everybody else. So
there you go. Then yeah. Thank you for your service, by the way.
thank you. when you started your idea of traveling, of backpacking throughout, I think you said it was, I don't know if it was Europe or you had your backpack tripping where you visited 9 countries in 3 months. Where did that idea come from? And then how did you begin that process of planning that?
Well, so I don't know why I kind of chickened out of doing study abroad during college, and I don't have a good reason why. I don't know why I did not do it. It's something that I regret not doing. But my senior year of college, I was dating a guy who is now my husband, and I also lived with one of my best friends, Julie, and I had another best friend from high school. And I just decided one night I'm going to do this trip around Western Europe. I don't care if anyone's coming with me or not, but this is what I want to do. And I remember taking out a piece of like printer paper and just I was with Julie, my roommate, and I remember just writing like, I, Christina Trotter, and I, Julie Hart, promised to go to Europe after college or something to that effect, and I made her sign it as well. And so we did. The four of us went, and we were all starting our first jobs at different times of the summer. So some came and went, and whatever. But I stayed for 3 months, and it was incredible.
What countries did you go to? Like, where did you start? And then how did you come up with the path to all these different countries actually going to?
Yeah. So we started. Julie and her boyfriend started actually in London, and they're now married too. And then he had to leave for his first job. But then the rest of us all started in Paris, and we got a Eurail pass, which is incredible. You get for a very nominal fee, you get to travel around to different countries in Europe. And it's wherever you can get the tickets, you can go. And so we just made a decision to do clockwise, and we did France, then Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, over to Prague, Switzerland, Italy, and Spain. I think that hopefully that's 9. I don't know, but that was that was the idea. So, but yeah, there wasn't, it was just which countries were geographically near each other, and then also the places that we had specific interests. So,
Did you have a favorite experience on that 3 months?
there were lots of things. I mean, I guess that question is always hard to answer because I think it just depends, on how you look at things. But like, there was some funny ones where like, we did a tour of the Loire Valley in France, and something was wrong. The tour guide was sick, so he couldn't go. And so I offered to translate for the driver, and it was with a group, it was a tour group. And so it wasn't just my friends. And so I gave a tour of the Loire Valley, having never been there before. And that was kind of interesting. And then Germany was a big surprise. And I found that I'm actually planning some trips for clients right now to Germany. And I'm realizing how much of a passion I have about that country. And it was one of those things where, like I said, we went because geographically it made sense. But once we got there, I found that like I'm really interested in history, and World War II is something that's a particular interest of mine. So Berlin and Dachau and Normandy were very powerful moments for me personally. My grandpa actually had been part of the liberation of Dachau concentration camp, so that also opened a dialogue for guys back then didn't talk about World War II. And so when I got back, I was able to have a couple of conversations with him before he died about that experience. And so that was very meaningful for me.
Wow, yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, that's absolutely. So now that part of history means something so much more to you than if you were just to go to it and not have that connection with your grandfather.
Yes, exactly.
So why is traveling so important and impactful to you?
Oh man, I think it's given me so much. I mean, when I think about the world and the people in the world and stuff, I have empathy for so many people, just because I know that sometimes we look at things just through one view, one lens. And, I think we would be a less divisive country right now if we all just got out and saw the world a little bit more, because you really learn more about people's perspectives and where they're coming from. And there's a lot of things that I don't agree with, and that people may say or do or whatever, but I can at least see, where people are coming from a little bit easier, I think. I also have found that it just like it opens me up creatively. Like when I go somewhere, I get so excited and I feel like all neurons are firing, and it's just, I don't know. I mean, there's nothing that for me feels better. So,
I think that's one thing that I've heard that I hear a lot is when somebody's getting writer's block or they're just stuck. If you change your scenery, like even if that means going to a coffee shop instead of working from home, that changes your ability to look at a task and see, hey, like looking at it a different angle. And so I can imagine that happening when you're traveling too. That same experience happens.
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to that end, like, you know, I get that way through travel. I feel that way when I take a walk. If I'm out in nature and hiking, that's one of my favorite things to do. So yeah, I agree.
How often do you think people should travel?
I think you should travel as often as you can, and have the desire to do that. I think it really challenges your perspectives and stuff. So I think it's a good thing to do, but there's different purposes for trips too. So it kind of depends what you want to get out of that particular trip. So sometimes you're working really hard and you just need a mental break, and there's nothing better than, just laying on a beach somewhere. Sometimes, you may feel like you're creatively in a rut or something, and, maybe you need a really interesting cultural experience. Maybe, going down to Mexico to Oaxaca and learning about the handicrafts there, or to Day of the Dead or something of that nature. Maybe that's enough to get your spark going. Sometimes you just want to eat really good food and learn about, different cultures and stuff. So there's a lot of reasons, why you may want to do it. And then the frequency is also just kind of dictated by what sort of constraints you have. Like, we all have a certain amount of money that we can budget on it. And it kind of depends on your priorities. Like, is travel a priority for you? And then time's the big one, right? A lot of people want to travel, but they may not have time off from work or the flexibility to work remotely. Oh, and then other constraints that people may have are like physical limitations or anxieties and phobias that they have to work around. So, or dietary concerns. So there's reasons that kind of inform why and how often people travel. But I think once you take those things into consideration, you can find the right mix for yourself.
One of the biggest stigmas about traveling is the financial burden that
Mhm.
people have when it comes to traveling. How can is there a way where you can demystify that where it's not as expensive as people think it is, or maybe it is as expensive as people think it is?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends, because like I think, there's like sometimes a place will seem really expensive, like to go over to Asia or South America sounds really expensive. And it's true, the flights are very costly. But once you get to a lot of those places, and I'm not talking about Japan because that's both expensive to get to and expensive to once you get there. But a place like Thailand, for example, or a place like Argentina in South America, once you get there, the costs are very, very minimal. And so I would argue that you can do that sometimes more affordably than a trip to Europe. I mean, everybody wants to go to Italy, but I'll tell you, it is ridiculously expensive, especially nowadays. Like, they came out of the pandemic, and like everybody's going there, and the prices are just astronomical. I mean, if you want to get a driver between, Rome and Florence, you're looking at €1,000 to do that. That's a lot of money.
Wow.
So, now there's ways to do that less expensively. Rental cars are good, are reasonable there, but just things that that, sometimes, you think, oh, this won't be that big of a deal. There's a good deal to Italy. I'm just going to hop on it. And then once you start actually adding up the costs, it can be a lot higher. But one way that I would say that people can maximize their money is, if you can, like, go somewhere for longer and do more slow travel. People, a lot of times Americans want to go over to Europe and they want to, like, go to all these cities that are in different places. And I always say, like, no, just, either focus on, one area, and get to know it really well. Or if you're going to do regional travel, stick to places that are actually nearby, and just, you always have to assume, and this is something that Rick Steves has said numerous times, like, you just have to assume that you'll go back. That may or may not be true, but it can release a little bit of pressure on yourself when you're trying to pick where you're going to go.
What would be some of the most financially responsible places to go? You mentioned Thailand, but where else could somebody go for, let's say, a week-long adventure where they could still save money or budget money consciously and still enjoy themselves?
Well, I'll tell you the answer to that, and I'll also give you another tip. So one tip is, there's a lot of places that are really hot right now, and if everybody's going there, it's not a good deal anymore. So that's one tip. But in terms of where good places are right now, where you get a lot for your money, I think Central America is a really good option. So Colombia, Panama, Guatemala. I just got back from Belize with our family, and it was very reasonable, like extremely reasonable. We stayed in a cool tree house and it was $120 a night. We were headed to Guatemala here in a couple of weeks, and everything is very reasonable. So those are some definite ones. And then when you get down to other countries, like I said, Argentina, that goes pretty far. Bolivia, your money will go far. When you talk about Southeast Asia, I think of like Thailand, and Vietnam is a good option. Cambodia. So those are some of, like, my favorite places to go, and you have an amazing time, and it's not that expensive to do it.
While we're still on the topic of finances, how did traveling shape your view of financial success?
Well, that's another interesting thing because, I think we come from a culture where more is more, or that's what we think. So, you have a job and you work these many hours and you want to get six figures, and you just want to keep earning more and more bonuses, more this, more that. And what I found is that's not, money can give you some financial security, but it doesn't equate to happiness. We all know that. But one way, like, I was in Chile many years ago, and my husband and I were staying in a hostel, and we were down in Patagonia, and we were going to go to Torres del Paine National Park. And we were waiting for the guy that was going to drive us there. And anyways, I was sitting there and I was talking to a guy that worked in the hostel, and his name was Marcelo, and he'd been there all summer. And I was just asking him about his travels and what he was passionate about. Anyway, it just kind of came out that he was traveling, and he was working there specifically until he got a watch. And he wanted a watch with an altimeter on it. And so he didn't know when he would be done working there, but that was what he had negotiated with the owner of the hostel. And that got me thinking, like, this is a guy that is just, that's all he's working just to get a watch, like, he's not making X dollars of, per hour or whatever.
Hmm.
And then it made me realize that you really only have to have money for what you want to do in life, and so it's interesting, and that has informed my life, like, numerous times since then. So I worked really hard, and I worked for a major consulting firm for many years, and I loved it, but I also worked crazy hours, and I got burnt out, and I was making really good money. And I gave it up. I was having kids. I came in, I wanted to spend time with my kids, and that was worth more than the dollar amount. And now travel advising, there are ways to make a lot of money, but I have not gotten to them yet. And so, but I'm starting to figure it out a little bit better. But what I've found is that your passions for things, and sometimes it's not all about money. And as long as my husband and I really like to travel, we like to, eat nice meals. We've always enjoyed, good wines and things of that nature. And so as long as we have the money to do what we want to do, we're good.
I think it's important to recognize why you want the money. Like you said, when you actually sit there and say, this is why, it's not about creating a specific dollar amount to say, hey, everybody, look, I have all this dollar amount. It's about, hey, I'm creating these memories, and this is truly what I want to get out of this life. And in order to do that, yes, money is important. You need money to survive, but you don't need to have, $1 million, or maybe you do, but knowing where that balance is, I think sets the tone of where you're going to travel to next and what it is you really want out of life.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there's been, if you bring it back to travel and stuff, there are places that I will spend more money because I want to have a certain experience or a certain level of whatever. An example might be like, well, actually, this was kind of an interesting one. We did a safari a number of years ago. We started out as backpackers, and then the older you get, and when you do have some money, you decide, you're kind of done with the backpacking thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, this was before we had kids, but we did a safari, and what we did to kind of balance things is that we would do a couple of days where we were like camping in an actual park, a safari park, and then we would spend a night in like a really nice safari lodge. And so it was like the yin and the yang. It was like, it was, but both were amazing experiences, right? You went to the lodge and it was incredible food and just very nice. But then when we were camping within the safari park, like we had an elephant walk by our tent when we were when we were asleep, and that's kind of scary, but it's also kind of cool. If you live to tell the story, it's a great story, right?
Yeah.
And we heard lions calling out to each other in the night, and so it wasn't fancy at all, but we had an amazing experience, and it was totally worth it.
For people who are scared to travel overseas to different countries, what can you tell them to put their mind at ease or to help inspire them to actually travel outside of the US?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would tell them, I actually have coached a woman on this because that was her concern. And what I would say is, start with something that's easy. And easy could be going to Ireland or to London, for example, someplace where you speak the language. And, like in the case of Ireland, the people are known for being very warm and friendly, and they are. And so it makes it easier, right? So it's a different place, and it'll be intoxicating, all the culture that you're soaking up, but it's also not that hard of a travel to do. So, and the other thing, and this, I'm not trying to plug travel advising, but use a travel agent because they are going to know the area. They're going to make sure that if you tell them that you're an anxious traveler, they're going to go out of their way to make sure that all the connection points are well laid out so that you don't have to worry about those kinds of things.
Awesome. Would you recommend somebody start small in the sense of maybe not leaving the country yet, just to travel somewhere to get used to that or more comfortable? And then if so, where would be a good starting point for them to just begin the idea of traveling?
Yeah, I think it depends on maybe who you're traveling with or what your intention is. So, for example, if you're a family, something that would be easy to do would be, or easy but still kind of getting a taste for some complexity and whatnot would be to go to a national park, because there's a lot of things to juggle in terms of where to go, what to see, getting tickets, all that. So it gives you a little bit of taste for the complexity, but it's still very manageable. If you are an individual, though, I would say traveling anywhere on your own. And if you really want to start small, start in your own city. Go check into a hotel and go downstairs and sit at the table by yourself. And, or even better yet, if you can find a restaurant in your town that has like a communal table that everyone kind of sits around, do that. And just make yourself open to conversation. You can, if you bring a computer, I think that kind of blocks it off, or if you're sitting on your phone. But if you have a notepad or a book or magazine or something, generally people will strike up a conversation, and you could be the one to strike up the conversation. But I think those are little ways. But and if you want to do something bigger from that, you could do something like go to a big city, go to New York City, or and I think once you experience metros and taxis and trying to navigate around a city that you don't know, I think that'll give you a good feel for some of the things you might need to think about when you're traveling.
I think it's important to do a staycation, like you said. And also, I think it's like you said, being present in the moment. Electronics get in the way so much, like you said. And if we're actually there to grow, it's important to be present and be willing to grow, looking for those opportunities to actually sit there and immerse yourself, whether that's in the city, in nature, another state, or something, something like that, but to actually try to experience something.
Yes, for sure. And on that note, when my husband and I first started traveling, like that trip to Western Europe all those years ago, cell phones were around, but the data plan was too expensive to use it. And so I'll never forget, when he and I and our friends were walking around with our backpacks on, and we got to a town in Germany, and we got off the train station, or out of the train station, and we kind of looked around. We were totally lost as to how to get to the hostel. And I'll never forget, and this would never happen in this day and age because everyone's got a phone and, Google Maps or whatever. But like there was a lady that was leaning out of a second floor place. There was, a man that was like sweeping. And anyways, there was like three people that just like all pointed the way to the hostel for us. And I mean, it was like something you'd see in a movie. I mean, it was hilarious, and it's imprinted on my mind now because it's just, it was such an unusual thing to happen. But, but that's, also another thing to think about, even in this day and age when we have all these tools, is, rely on them if you get lost, but also, make yourself accessible to asking for directions or asking for recommendations from people, because yes, you can look on Yelp, and Yelp will tell you great places to eat. And yes, you can use a map application to get from point A to point B. But when you have a conversation, it's always, well, not always, but almost always going to, you're going to remember it, right? It's going to be meaningful in some way. Really, you open yourself up into more interesting experiences.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite place that you've traveled to?
Thailand and Argentina are our favorite places. So for Argentina, it's all about the wine and the varied landscapes. There's the Pampas, there's the city life in Buenos Aires, there's Mendoza, which is great for winemaking. There's Patagonia, you've got the Lake District. There's so many amazing experiences to be had in Argentina. And that's another thing when we talk about like ways to be more efficient or more financially smart about travel, look at exchange rates and see how strong, the dollar is against a place, and your money will go that much further, right? So I remember when we were there, we were able to get like steak and a glass of red wine for the equivalent of $7. So it just, I mean, that's amazing. And then similarly, when in Thailand, like the food costs were so inexpensive for us, and everything was so fresh. And I mean, it's literally like, chickens and pigs sometimes walking around, and like, but like I noticed the meat it tasted so good and so fresh. And just, the people were really engaged and they wanted to make sure that we were having a good time. And again, the varied landscapes, you've got all the beaches down in the south, and then you've got the freneticness of like Bangkok and all the cool places to go and see there. And then you've got up north, and you got Chiang Mai, which is like such a culturally interesting place, and there's so many classes and things you can do. So those, when you look at it all around, those would be, our favorite places generally.
Do you have a least favorite place that you've been?
No. So here's a fun fact about me. We've had all sorts of crazy things happen in our travels. I mean, we've been mugged. I've had a baboon pee into my mouth, which is disgusting. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, we've had some really crazy things happen to us, but it's all about your attitude. And I can't think of any place that I've ever been where I hated it. And so there are places that, I'm not sure that I'll ever get back to, but that's because the world is pretty big and there's other places that I want to go to. So I really think it's about how you look at things and your attitude. I mean, we had some challenges when we went around Vietnam, when we got up to the north, and just their perspective around Americans. It was kind of hard as I wasn't personally in the military, but with my dad having been in the military, and my husband's father was also, just some things about the Vietnam War and from their viewpoints and stuff, it was pretty hard to stomach. But I still enjoyed the country overall, and the people, especially in the South, were so warm and welcoming and hardworking. But throughout the entire country, I really enjoyed it.
That's a great attitude to have too.
Oh, thank you. It's important, and so I hope, I'm always kind of, sometimes when people tell me stories about their travel, it's kind of like, well, you kind of ruined it for yourself, you got to move on, and then make it a good one, make it a good memory.
Can you list off 3 places that are still on your bucket list?
Yes. The bucket list never, ever, ever gets finished. And it only gets longer, because that's the other thing. Once you start traveling, you just learn about more places. So it never ends. Antarctica is huge on my list. That's a big goal for me. Now that I just am on the other side of breast cancer and I'm 47 years old, I have a goal to get there by 50. So I actually have been talking to some vendors about organizing a group trip to do that. And I was just doing that yesterday. So that's a big one for me. And then I also want to get up to Churchill, Manitoba to see the polar bears. And I have one of my big motivations in travel is I love wildlife travel. And so those are 2 big ones. And then I'd also just like to get up to somewhere like Finland, and they've got the igloos where you can, hopefully see aurora borealis, and there's reindeer and whatnot. And that's something that definitely appeals to me as well.
If somebody had to have 3 things on their bucket list, what would you recommend should be on their bucket list?
If you like animals, Galapagos. I would say Galapagos or like a safari in Eastern or Southern Africa. But having done both, Galapagos was I don't know, I think it's the most special place in the world. That would be one place. Let me think. I mean, there's so many good places. I think a lot of it too just kind of depends on, of course, what your interests are. If you're interested in history, like Berlin is a great place, or there's all sorts of sites around the U.S. if you're interested in in American history. So it kind of just depends on what your interests are. But I think it's easier if you tell me some. What are you interested in? I'll tell you where you should go. Like, what kind of things do you like to do?
The beach is a great thing. And food is probably this one of the other components that have to be considered.
Yeah. So in terms of beaches, I think, Maldives or Tahiti are definitely great options. Turks and Caicos. In terms of food, Italy is popular for a good reason. I mean, everything is such high quality, and there's so many things. You get up to like Bologna and into Tuscany and Puglia. It's like, or not Puglia, Umbria. It's amazing. Like, there's truffles and sausage and cheese and wine and olive oil and whatever. There's a million different things. So I think that's a really good one. But I also just think it depends on what kind of cuisine you're into. Like Greece is a great one as well. Thailand, like I said, we loved that. So I think it just, yeah. So there's so many good things. So I don't know. What I would say is like, there's places that people will tell you, they'll say that you need to go. That was the part I guess I didn't share about my Paris story, having been there for the first time. I've been there many times since, and people love Paris, but it's actually not one of my favorite places. So it is a beautiful place. I would never advise anyone not to go there, but I just think for me, there's so many other things that I'm more passionate about now. So yeah, but so never feel obligated to do what everybody says that you should do, because then, to thine own self be true. As Shakespeare said, you've got to, what you like. So, and you may not know where that is, but if you tell someone, they'll tell you where to go, and you can look for it yourself and make your own decision if it's a good fit.
So now that we're getting near the end of the podcast, I have 3 questions which I ask all guests, and they're over the topics of what this podcast is, which is live, love, and grow.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first question I have for you is, what advice can you share about how to create a life that leaves a positive impact on the world?
Well, I think, you kind of have to work backwards on that. And you have to think, and this is such a doomsday sounding thing, but as someone that, again, has gone through cancer, then you do start to look at things differently. And, if you think about like your obituary being written, that's totally morbid. But if you think about that and you just say, how would you like it to be read? What would you want to be on there? And, things like, your family and your passions and things like that. So that's kind of how it relates to you, but how it relates to the world is, once we're all gone, how do we individually live on? And, it depends on where you're headed in life, where you are and where you're headed. And, you can make your marks in small ways through donations to parks or universities or whatever. So it might be from a monetary perspective, but it also might just be from being kind to a person. One thing that, there's people that have no idea how they have impacted me, but, I used to have dark, thick, curly hair as of, last March. And now here I am, salt and pepper and whatever. And people will come up to me and say, "Oh my God, I love your hair. It is so cool." And, they have no idea, it means something to me, right? Because they made a point to come up to me, and they don't know me. They don't have to say anything. It's not my friends and family that are just trying to make me feel better. So those people have, in my opinion, impacted the world and made it a better place just through their interactions, being nice.
I love it. And I love the fact that you went with the obituary route, because I think we view that as so morbid, but it's actually something I've heard a lot of lately, that people are actually recommending that you do that, because that gives you an idea of what you still want in your life, and you can actually go out there and go get it.
Yeah. And it's something like you can get a million ideas and become overwhelmed, but when you boil it down to the few paragraphs that are going to be in the newspaper, it makes it a little bit easier to figure out what those things are.
My second question is, what are some practical ways people can cultivate self-love?
I think patience with yourself. I think if one of the things that, as I continue to age, unfortunately, as we all do, that I realize though, is like, when you're younger, all are the things that, you've learned about in books and stuff. You don't have any practical experience with it. And you have so many questions and whatnot. And like, as an example, like when I was in my 20s and stuff, I didn't grow up in a household which this is kind of, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit, but like I didn't really learn or have any interest in how to cook and how to garden and do those sorts of things. And then you get out on your own and it's like you kind of need to learn how to do some of that stuff, right? And it
Hmm.
was overwhelming. But if you just accept that it's going to take time and you're going to get better, then not only do you get better, but you open other doors too. So it goes from not being able to make anything to you can make spaghetti to eventually one day making, maybe you're growing your own tomatoes and you're making your own sauce, on your own, to maybe then another, down the road, maybe you're in Italy and you're learning how to make it from a nonna that's been, she's been doing this for decades and stuff. So there's layers to everything.
Hmm. My third and final question is, what is one actionable tip someone can do today to grow 1% better?
Write down a list of things that you want to do or accomplish. And then I would say to pick 1 to 3 of those things. And then I would say write down in as much detail as you can what the steps are to accomplish each of those things. And then I would say put a date, not a date, put a date next to each one of those items. And then I would say put it on your calendar and block time to do each of those things. And then do one of them. Do the first thing, I guess.
Yeah, that's absolutely, I love that. That's a great action plan to set forth and actually create that life that we want.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, how can people connect with you?
Well, there's lots of ways. I am on Instagram under destined_globetrotter. And then also, I have a website, destinedglobetrotter.com, and it's all just one word, destined. The meaning is, so my last name is Trotter. So I am a globetrotter, and I say that I was destined to be a globetrotter just by sheer nature of marrying a man named Trotter and loving travel. So my website is probably, and Instagram, it's probably one of the best ways. I'm also on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook page, and yeah, I'm always happy to connect and answer any questions. And yeah, and I think you're going to put some of my information in the show notes too. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
And how can people support you on your journey?
Well, I really, really appreciate that question, Matt, because that's because I am trying to grow a little bit more in that. So I would say one way is, if you need travel services, reach out. Another way, though, is just, interacting with any content that I put, whether it's it's something on Instagram, or more importantly, if you go on my website or subscribe to my newsletter, that would be great and much appreciated. That's probably going to go the furthest.
Fantastic. Well, Chrissy, I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation talking about travel and how that inspires people to get out of their comfort zone and actually go try something new, and how that experience can translate into some amazing memories down the road. And I'm glad we were able to have that conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate the time. It was really nice to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast. I hope you took something away from this episode that you can implement today just like I did. I'd love to know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. Let me know by sharing this episode in your Instagram stories and tag me at Matt Fendora. If you've enjoyed this episode, the ones before, and or you're looking forward to future episodes, please hit that subscribe or follow button. It helps me get this information to even more people. No matter what you choose to do, choose to live, love, and grow. Thank you, and have an outstanding day.